Hiya, I'm Anya, and I'm here to lay something spiritual on ya. So here we are in the Northern Hemisphere, slowly approaching yet another holiday, another fire festival on the wheel of the year. That holiday is known as Imbolc, sometimes spelled this way, sometimes spelled this way. So let's talk about what Imbolc actually is. In terms of the changing of seasons and the cycles of nature, Imbolc is this midway point between winter and spring. We have passed the dark months, and by Imbolc we should be really starting to see signs of change and life coming back to Earth. And that's what this holiday is here to represent. In the Northern Hemisphere, Imbolc is celebrated around the 1st of February. Sometimes I've seen the 2nd of February as well. Usually these festivals last for the full day, so it would be February 1st into the 2nd. And then in the Southern Hemisphere, this would be celebrated in August on the 1st and the 2nd as well. Now, as a holiday and as a celebration of the cycles of life and nature, Imbolc actually celebrates the lactation and birthing cycles of sheep. This sounds a little bit weird, I know, but think about what this time of year would have meant to our ancestors. We're coming out of the dark months and we're wanting to see some more signs of life coming back into the world. We're wanting to start seeing that we are going to be able to start planting things. We might be seeing that the days are just a tiny bit longer, and that's a comfort. But what about seeing life returning to the planet? What about seeing how the world starts changing once the sun starts staying out longer? Well, the thing about sheep is they're usually giving birth in early spring. So at this stage, our ancestors, farmers, would have started seeing the sheep preparing to give birth, starting to lactate in preparation for the lambs being born. And this would have been a big celebration for our ancestors because it is a big sign that things are changing, that life is coming back. You know, don't we all want to celebrate baby animals just a little bit? They're super cute and stuff. And so at this time of year at Imbolc, we are here celebrating the awakening of Earth again, the awakening of nature, the rebirth of nature, because we are starting to see the signs. In addition to the lambs, we also might see some hints of flowers starting to come back up, say the snowbells that are often coming out at this time of year. And this really would have been a big thing for our ancestors to celebrate as we are coming out of these dark months, as we're coming out of our own hibernation and seeing these signs that, don't worry, light is gonna come, warmth is gonna come, growth is gonna come, life has been renewed, and that's an exciting thing, even if we know that there might be a few more cold weeks ahead of us. And say, don't we also have a holiday in modern times where an animal comes and tells us if we are going to have 6 more weeks of winter or if we're going to get an early spring? How interesting is that? Yes, this is a time to remember that even if there's some cold days ahead, even if we're not fully out of winter just yet, we are seeing signs that change is coming. And who isn't enthralled with a little bit of change, right? So like I do in all of these videos where I'm talking about the cycles of nature, the cycles of the sun, and what these holidays mean in terms of like mythos and things like that, let me talk about where the god and the goddess are and where the nature and the sun is and where they are in terms of this holiday, Imbolc. Now, I personally liken the equinoxes and solstices to the life cycles of the sun or the god. This is because the solstices and the equinoxes are usually holidays that represent the change of seasons and ultimately represent the changing of the strength of the sun. So I liken those festivals to the god and changes within him and his own strength. While I often see these fire festivals of Beltane, Lunasa, Samhain, and Imbolc as holidays representing the goddess and her own changes in nature and what's happening with her and the natural world around us, her own cycles of fertility. That does not mean that there aren't things going on with the god in the fire festivals, and it doesn't mean that there aren't changes within the goddess and her fertility in the solstices and equinoxes. So at this stage, we start seeing the goddess come back into her maiden form. During the dark months of winter, the goddess may be in hibernation or resting with the god, as we see nature herself is quiet and in rest. Or she may be shown as the crone, the dark and hardened goddess who rules the winter months with a harsh fury. But at Imbolc, we start seeing life slowly creep back into the world, meaning the goddess is awakening again. This signifies her own rebirth back into the Maiden. Some stories say that at this time she's recovered from the rebirth of the god, or even that she herself provided this rebirth to the god, and that at this time at Imbolc, she has finally rested enough and recovered enough and felt the warmth of the sun so that she can start bringing life back into the natural world. These longer days have revitalized her and awakened her into this new maiden form of youth and frivolity and happiness. Let's remember, the god and the goddess are also present here in the natural world. So a lot of what I'm saying here is metaphorical. It's very important that we remember that we are talking a lot about metaphors. The goddess is Earth herself, and she sustains all of life on this planet. She provides all that we need. And that is very much a feminine thing. So that's why we talk about nature and the earth as female, as goddess. And when we look at what the sun does for the life on earth, it provides us warmth. It provides us with the nutrients that we need in order to continue sustaining life. That is a very masculine role. So that is why the sun is often thought of as God. But again, it's important to stress we are talking metaphorically here. So that's why there's a lot of different ways these stories can be told. But as we know, winter doesn't always give up her grip so easily, so there may be some fighting back and forth between the crone and the maiden. But the maiden form of the goddess represents newness, lightness, and hope. The potential of all that could be is here and now as this fresh young version of the goddess herself. She has the ability to restart with new vigor and fertility once again. So what's she going to grow this season? Imbolc is also about these early stages of fertility and the life that can come from it. It's the awakening of potential. In our more conservative societies, we don't really like talking about fertility and things like that as being sacred, especially when we're talking about youth. So this idea of the maiden, this young version of a woman being in her fertile stage and wanting to explore and have fun with her own fertility, that can make us a little bit squeamish. We don't really want to talk about that, and I can understand why we think that way. But let's remember that being fertile in and of itself is a blessing, whether it's physically pregnant or fertile with ideas and creativity and things we want to bring into the world. Our own bursts of creativity can equally be something that we're fertile with. Fertility does not just mean pregnant with life or a child. So yes, the rebirth of the goddess can also be seen as a celebration of fertility, and that is a beautiful and wonderful thing to celebrate as well, because without the fertility of this natural world that we live in, our lives would not be sustained. So why wouldn't we celebrate the fertility of the goddess and the virility of the god? These are aspects of masculinity and femininity that are so beautiful and so necessary to life, both in tandem, in balance, that we should be celebrating them. And it's a good reminder that we too can be using our fertility in a myriad of ways. We can be using our abilities to create new things, whether it be new life or new books, art, stories, videos. We can be using our own creativity to bring newness into our world as well. Imbolc's a great way to start celebrating that, because it is this start of life. And if you have watched my video on how to use the Wheel of the Year to plan out your goals, you'll remember that at this stage, if you haven't already, it's a good stage to start planting the seeds of what you want to achieve this year. So I've talked about the goddess and where she is at this stage. Let's talk a little bit about where the god and the sun is at this stage. So as the goddess is in her maiden form, in the same way, mirroring her, the god is in his youth form. Remember, he's been reborn at the winter solstice. So he is now grown into being more of an adventurous youth. And this mirrors the stage that the goddess is at in her maiden form. The god isn't yet at the maturity level of the father, and that's okay, because the goddess equally is also not at the maturity stage of mother. But he's continuing to grow in strength. We can see that because we know that the sun is starting to stay out a little bit longer each day, and the days are slowly starting to outweigh the nighttime hours. So both our god and goddess are still young, especially in the sense of maturity, and this is fine. Let's not act like being young and silly and immature wasn't an important stage in our lives too. For the god and the goddess, it means they're growing in their own power. They're enjoying life and they're enjoying each other. The god and the goddess, the sun and the earth, they're making lots of love at this point. And again, I call to remind you, we are talking about metaphors here. But it's also not super metaphorical. Have you ever seen the way the sun will just catch the peaks of a mountain and you have this beautiful image that you can't capture in a photograph? Or the way the sun just hits a grouping of trees and you can't mimic the way that light caresses those trees. You cannot tell me the sun does not love and admire and appreciate this planet. But getting back to the god and the goddess at this stage, they are making lots of love and we are starting to see the fruits of that all around us. Think about the baby animals that are being born at this time, and don't tell me you don't love the sight of baby animals. They're awesome and they're wonderful and oh, they're so cute and I want to squish them all. But we also see the buds forming on trees and the little bright colors of flowers starting to pop up at this time. This would not be able to happen if we did not have the balance of the sun, God, providing his light and his warmth and support for the goddess. The seeds of nature cannot survive without the goddess continuing to provide of her own body for us to continue living and growing. It is a beautiful and harmonious relationship that does balance each other out. And I find it a wonderful thing to think about and admire in the natural world. And I know it's a little bit too much for some other people, but you know, that's just me. And that's why I like sharing it with other people, because I think it's kind of cool. So all this fruit, all this life that we start seeing coming back into the natural world, that is all because the god and the goddess love each other and realize how much their own energies balance each other out. And it is their connection and their own cycles of life and rebirth and constant union that keep life on this planet going. As the seasons continue, we will start to see this love and connection grow between them and start to mature until they become the mother and the father and the crone and the sage once again. At those stages, they start to recognize more the responsibilities that they have to the life that they've been sustaining on this planet. And that's why we see these transitions in nature. And I talk about them in the other videos, you know, when you see the crone who just starts to realize I have to get through these harsh months. That's why we go into rest, in hibernation. But it's also because she doesn't have the deep support of the sun as much as she does in the summer months. Everything gets harsher and darker and colder, but she still makes sure that there's a way for the life she sustains to continue. Psst! There are also some allegories here between the stages of life and connecting with others in a human sense too, but maybe I'll talk about that in another video, because I know a lot of people are not comfortable talking about this. Now, I cannot talk about Imbolc without talking about one specific deity, and that is the goddess Bridget. As some of you may know, Bridget is a goddess in Celtic mythology. She is the goddess of the hearth and home, and also of the anvil. She will take you to the fire to be reforged when you need it. But she's also a goddess of poetry and midwifery. She helps bring new life, both in terms of creativity and babies, into the world. So, of course, she would be celebrated at a time that is thought to be the quickening of the earth, the gradual awakening of life once more. She was one of the most powerful deities in the Tuatha De Danann, and was even said to be a triple goddess. So, for ancient Celtic people, Imbolc was also a time to celebrate the goddess Bridget and all that she did for them. Now, have you heard that Bridget was such a well-loved, well-respected, and well-honored goddess in Ireland that the Irish would not go over to Christianity without her? That's a story that is often told, and because of it, it is argued that Bridget was made into a saint. Some will argue this isn't true, and the unfortunate reality is that we don't totally know for sure. Records from those times are difficult to find and difficult to trust, as there would obviously be biases against pagans and pagan faiths. But we can't deny that there are some similarities between the goddess Bridget and the Christian Saint Bridget. So it's very likely that at least some inspiration was taken. And on Imbolc in the Northern Hemisphere, again, 1st to the 2nd of February, let's remember without judgment that yes, a lot of pagan holidays were converted into Christianity in order to convert as many people as possible. But on this day, Saint Bridget is also celebrated. A lot of modern pagans find insult in this, and a lot of Christians don't like to be reminded of this, but I think it's an important thing to remember. And we can also find some joys in how to celebrate. For example, since Bridget is a figure of poetry, why not write some poetry on Imbolc? But I'll talk about ways to celebrate Imbolc in my next video. So I thank you guys for watching this video on Imbolc as a holiday, what it means to the cycles of nature, the god and the goddess, and I'll see you in my next one on ways to celebrate Imbolc. Thanks guys, Anya out, bye!